Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at conclusions using a set of sample guidelines and a full exemplar conclusion on Julio Cortázar's House Taken Over. There are two key elements to a conclusion. The first is a restatement of the thesis and possibly the supporting arguments. This is the least challenging, most simplistic element of the conclusion. It's a simple, direct, probably single sentence restatement of the core argument that you have made in your essay. Now, I say that it is rather simplistic and it's short because, well, you've just gone about proving this argument. You've articulated it in the thesis, and then you've carried that argument through the rest of your paragraphs. So you don't necessarily really need to restate the argument. If you've developed it properly, then your reader should be well aware of what it was that you were trying to prove. However, for simplicity and directness' sake, we do include it again. The meat of the conclusion, which should be weighty, it should be about the same length as the introduction. The bulk of it is a memorable ending. And that sounds really rather amorphous, but this is the opportunity for you to tell your reader either how this argument that you have made or the point that you've proven is actually relevant or germane to their lives or to the contemporary world in which we live, or to suggest some way in which this argument could be developed further, either by indicating the way in which this argument could be explored using alternate elements of this text, or addressing some area of the argument that hasn't been fully developed. Not to make a new argument, but by saying that you acknowledge that something inside the story or something about this argument hasn't been developed as fully as it could be, and that might make a productive subject for a future essay on this topic. So, element one, the restatement of the thesis and supporting arguments. You should use different sentence structures and words, although you can repeat keywords or sentence structures in this restatement of the thesis. And then element two, a memorable ending. Offer something new and interesting for the reader to ponder that goes beyond your thesis. So some possible strategies are offer a new reflection on your topic, or point out your subject's importance relative to the real world, connecting it to contemporary events or something that might be germane or applicable to, well, our way of life. Be careful that you don't go too far afield. So as an example of a poorly constructed conclusion, one of my students once wrote about Satan in Paradise Lost. So Satan is a character in John Milton's epic poem, Paradise Lost, and his claim was that in his conclusion, he connected Satan and how Satan is characterized to 1984 and said that George Orwell was inspired by Paradise Lost. That's way too far afield. You can't make these kinds of broad brush connections or these fanciful connections. You have to make sure that your ideas are logically grounded. So you can't necessarily say, well, this work was inspired by another one, but you could say, well, we see this kind of problem expressed in contemporary society in these ways, and so the ideas that the text explores are actually relevant to us or to this current situation, and they might actually give us insight into how we might best address it. That would be a great way of opening outward, of having this transition to openness or the memorable. Everything in your essay should build to the point that you wish to make in your conclusion. The conclusion itself cannot include new points of analysis. So you can't analyze something from the story and include it. But it must bring together everything that you've written and discuss the implications of your argument in its totality. Sample conclusions. So, building on those sample body paragraphs that you've already seen in the sample introduction and thesis statement, we have this last conclusion. Cortázar's analysis of tradition and the view that it ultimately arrests meaningful personal development is no doubt a product of the social and political situation in which he lived. Yet their applicability in context beyond that of wartime and post-war Argentina is clear. So really, I've only spent half of this first sentence articulating or restating the thesis. The rest of it is taking that thesis and transitioning it into a statement that this is actually applicable to situations well beyond his specific political context or the sociological and historical context of the story itself. And then the rest of the conclusion is going to explore that context or to explore that idea that we can actually apply that to, well, our lives and our situation without using the first person. Tradition may yet be a positive force insofar as it can shape a collective and thus a shared and binding sense of identity within a culture. In such cases, it serves a generative and practical purpose, yet when evacuated even of that most basic function, social mores become meaningless constraints. It's incumbent, it's thus responsible, or it is on all cultures then, to assess conventional beliefs and behaviors based on both their inherent merit and their cultural impact in order to determine whether a society as a whole should adopt or a progressive or conservative attitude towards them, traditions. Only such an evaluation can result in a sound embrace or abandonment of any individual tradition. So it's taking this idea, the argument that he's made, and then exploring how it can be applied to the real world. Thus, we conclude our evaluation and our review of essay structure. If you have any questions, I would encourage you to contact me or to raise this question or the questions that you might have in the context of one of our online synchronous learning sessions.